Well, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are joining us from today. I want to welcome you to the first Future of Travel session with Brian Kelly. My name is Nick Ewan, Senior Editor here at The Points Guy. And before I turn it over to our founder and CEO, I would like to quickly begin with a brief overview of the Zoom webinar platform. If you've joined today for the first time, you have joined in listen-only mode, but we definitely do want to hear from you. So as we go through the session today, if you do have any questions, please submit them to the Q&A portion of your Zoom webinar panel. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we have time for, not only typing responses back, but also answering them live at the end. We also will be launching a couple of polls as we go through the session today, and I actually want to go ahead and launch our first one right now. This is just to kind of get to know the audience, see your experience with cruising. This is a 2-question poll. So the first one is, on average, how frequently did you cruise prior to the pandemic? Your choices are 4 or more times per year, 2 to 3 times per year, once per year, less than once per year, or maybe you've never taken a cruise before. Then your second question is when you would feel comfortable getting on a cruise ship again. So summer of 2020, fall of 2020, winter of 2020 into 2021, spring of 2021, or it depends on how the ongoing pandemic evolves. So take just a few seconds, give us your thoughts. We'd love to get to know our audience and what they are experiencing, or what their background is with cruising. And it looks like just about 3/4 of our attendees have voted. I'll keep this open for just another few seconds before I share those results. All right, so here are your results. So we've got a kind of a variation here. We do have some really diehard cruisers who typically cruise 4 or more times per year. We also have a lot of more casual cruisers, and hopefully a lot of the content you're going to be hearing today is going to address that. Also a range of folks when they would feel comfortable getting on a cruise, but it looks like most are kind of playing a wait and see attitude to see how this pandemic evolves. So great information. Thank you all. I will be here moderating in the background, but without any further ado, I would like to introduce our founder and CEO, Brian Kelly.
Thank you for that introduction, Nick. Thanks everyone for joining. We've got over 1,000 attendees right now. And I really wanted to start this series, The Future of Travel, to talk to the leading minds in the industry. 2020 has certainly been a devastating year for travel. And frankly, there are just so many unknowns about the future of travel, when it will be safe to do so. So I want to talk to the top minds in travel and in government. So I'm excited to announce we've got some upcoming episodes with leaders. Joanna Garrity, the president of JetBlue, will be joining us. Sarah Nelson, the head flight attendant, and plenty of other guests from the State Department to doctors. So this series will really be about exploring what the future of travel actually looks like. And today, so I'm coming to you live from my new studio at home in New Hope, Pennsylvania. By the way, if you live in New York or Philly and have never been to New Hope in Lambertville, Pennsylvania, or Lambertville, New Jersey, highly recommend it. But today, for our first ever guest, I'm very excited to have Arnold Donald, who's been the president and CEO of Carnival Cruise Corporation since 2013. And Carnival is the largest leisure travel company in the world, and they account for 45% of all cruises. And it's not just the fun ship, Carnival. They've got 9 different brands, including Cunard, which is one that I want to take on my next trip to the UK, as well as Holland America and upscale line Seabourn, just to name a few. And right before joining Carnival as CEO, Arnold was also the CEO of the Executive Leadership Council, which is an organization of Fortune 500 Black leaders, as well as the president and CEO of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. Arnold, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Brian, it's a pleasure to be with you. Congratulations on your official first show ever. And it's an honor and a privilege to be here and to be a part of it. So thank you, Brian.
You know, Arnold, you're one of the top Black CEOs in America. And actually, this talk was supposed to happen on Blackout Tuesday, and we decided to reschedule it. I think I'd be remiss not to just ask you, how are you feeling, and what is your thoughts on the state of the world right now, in terms of everything we're seeing in racial demand for racial equality, police brutality? If you have any just general thoughts you'd like to share from us.
Yeah, sure. I'm sure I'm not different than most of you and most of the people listening to this broadcast. So there's the sad part of it, the disappointment part of it, the horror part of it, that I'm sure everyone feels and has been expressed, throughout the world. And then there's the, confusion part of it. And then, of course, there's the encouraging part of it. So the first part, the sad part, of course, the horrible deaths of people that were really depending on folks to protect them, and in effect had just the opposite occur. The other sad part is the battle that's been going on for centuries here in the U.S. I don't want to minimize the U.S., but here in the U.S. and race relations and the actual racism that still exists today. And the fact that, the reason why you see so much empathy around the world and protests around the world concerning this is that, racism is prevalent around the world. Different ethnicities, different, backgrounds than the one here, African-American and so on, but the similar, traits and the similar patterns, exist in other places in the world. And that's the sad aspect of it all. Like a lot of CEOs, I sent a letter out to my organization. I hesitated to do that. I, in fact, really debated with myself about doing that because words are so inadequate in the face of all of this. And then there's the confusing part. I have two nephews, one who is deputy chief of police for a major metropolitan area and another who's in internal affairs in the police department in a major metropolitan area. And then I have another family member who has bipolar disorder and who has been racially profiled multiple times, and who we make certain we introduce in the communities and to the police officers so they see him as a complete person, because if approached the wrong way or challenged the wrong way, he can get elevated and appear to be belligerent. And he's at risk of misidentification, misinterpretation, and a bad event. So, those confusing things, I want my nephews not to hesitate if they feel they're at risk, because I care for their lives. And I know they put their lives on the line every day, for the rest of us, for the rest of society. And I'm sure that's the situation a lot of police officers are in, most of them are. And so I wouldn't want them to hesitate in a moment, where their life is at risk. But clearly, we need better selection. We need better training and ongoing training for officers, and we need some reform where the unions, in their efforts to protect the officers that are members of their unions, don't go to the extent where they're actually protecting bad behavior amongst the small group of officers that are probably expressing such behavior. So that's on the reform side, and it needs to happen. It's obviously a fragmented thing because you have so many different police departments, but we have to elevate the selection, we have to elevate the training, and we have to have the unions, relook at the police unions, relook at how to protect the officers that are members. And then the encouraging side. The encouraging side is the outpouring of disdain for the events that happen that clearly, should not have happened. It's the joining together of people of all races to say that, hey, this isn't right and we need to address this issue of racism. It's happened in the past. We've made some progress, but obviously we still have a long way to go. But it's encouraging to see that. And then to get to us, we're travel. That's what we do. So on our ships in normal times, we'll carry crew from 145 plus different countries, guests from more countries than that. We take people to every continent on the planet. 700 different ports around the world. People on the ship experience people that are very different from them. And when they go to destinations, which is one reason why people travel, they go to discover new and different things. They visit people who are very different from them. Those people in those exchanges discover what they have in common with each other, and then they learn to celebrate the differences rather than to fear them. And I think travel is a key, antidote, for the poison, that is discrimination and racism and injustice. And the more people get to know each other and discover all the fundamental things we have in common, the more we learn to celebrate and appreciate the differences. And that's the essence of travel, and it's certainly the essence of cruise.
I completely agree with you that the more people travel, the more you see the world and see that we are one human race. I definitely think that's a net positive for humanity. Right. Now, it's tough during these times, especially and that travel is also extremely hit, and that people aren't able to experience other cultures right now. I have to say, the number one question, we should just get straight to it. I know people are, and first of all, I will apologize. I know in my home studio, I've got a 777 and an A380 behind me. I just realized, oh man, I don't have it. Do they make cruise ship models for home offices? And if so,
they do. Of course they do. Yeah. So absolutely. So you should absolutely have some cruise ships on your shelf there. So continue.
I've got some space, so I promise. So, all right. So my first question will be, and it's when will cruising return? Originally, we heard August from Carnival, and now we've got some pushback into the fall. What's the latest with your big cruise ships getting back out into service?
Of course, I wish I could give you a date, but we can't because it's a regulatory matter, and I learned a long time ago not to try to forecast regulatory dates. But here's when I can give you the conditions under which it'll return. Cruise at its essence is social gathering. So when society is starting to social gather again, then we can begin to talk about cruise. While it's stay-at-home, shelter-in-place, it's ridiculous to talk about cruise because it makes no sense. You're not going to cruise then. So as soon as people are really out socially gathering, when you're back in restaurants and subways and airport terminals and hotels and universities and so on and so forth, and society has decided that what level of risk is willing to live with concerning this particular virus, then we can begin to talk about cruise. And at that point, we can begin to talk about the protocols that will ensure that cruise is no worse from a risk standpoint than the shoreside social gathering activities that people would normally engage in. And hopefully, as in the past, we in the cruise industry, and certainly us at Carnival, are working hard to make certain we're in a position to make it even less risk than if people were involved in shoreside activities. So we'll work hard to do that, but at minimum, we're not looking for people to take on any more risk than they would normally take in the social gathering. So when that happens, we can begin to talk about it. To get a little more specific, right now in New Zealand, there were like 90,000 people at a rugby game. So that social gathering is starting to happen again. 90,000 people attended a rugby game. And that's fantastic when you think about it in this context and what's going on right now. So clearly they're becoming more comfortable with social gathering. If you go to China, social gatherings are beginning to pick up again. And now even in Europe, it's starting to happen because the virus, of course, moved from east to west and they got hit a little sooner than we did. And so you're beginning to hear talk about the possible restart of cruise in Germany, in Italy, in Spain. And so that conversation is live now, and people are actually discussing if we started sailing out, what would be the protocols? And the whole protocol thing, of course, Brian, is evolving. 5 weeks ago, 10 weeks ago, and we were stay-at-home shelter in place, there was all kinds of thoughts about the virus. Number one, that it could be potentially transmitted through HVAC or air conditioning systems, that it was lasting a long time on hard surfaces. Now you have those conversations, and scientists will tell you it's highly unlikely that it's transmitted through HVAC systems. And it's unlikely that there is significant transmission from hard surfaces. So the science is evolving, the knowledge is evolving, the testing still is somewhat indeterminate. Even if it's a swab test or PCR, there's still an error rate. You could be asymptomatic, as thought. You could be asymptomatic, test negative, but still potentially be positive and transmitting. And of course, the other tests, the antidote tests, antibodies tests, those tests, even if you have antibodies, you don't know, are you really immune? What does it mean? And so, but all of that, the science and the medicine is progressing very rapidly. And in a matter of weeks, I think more than months, we're going to have a lot more knowledge so we can develop protocols and regimens that mitigate the risk of spread, both shoreside, and then of course that can be transferred to cruise.
You mentioned regulatory approval. How does it work in the cruise industry? You know, we see flights today, you know, as long as a country allows flights, we see them going back and forth. You know, cruising is extremely global. You know, what is the final go-ahead that you'll need in order to get ships out there?
Well, right now we've, as an industry, you know, we volunteered on our own to stop sailing globally before there was any no sail order issue. But there is a no sail order issue, a new one that was issued a while ago from the Center for Disease Control. And so there is a no sail order in place in the U.S. And so if you want to leave a U.S. port or visit a U.S. port, you know, you have to respect, you know, the CDC order. And so we'll see that's scheduled to go as long as July 31st. CDC, I'm sure, is looking at, you know, what they're going to do next in regards to that. It's still, you know, middle of June now. So hopefully we have some time to see how things evolve and get more science behind us so we can understand how to mitigate the spread of the virus in a more effective ways. And we're watching what happens with the virus. Everyone is, and the CDC, of course, certainly is, but we all are, to see, you know, has it peaked? Is it on the decline? You know, is it becoming less and less prevalent in society and so on? And what level of risk people are willing to live with, because, you know, stay at home, shelter in place, as we've all experienced, we can only do for so long because it's, you know, it's not a condition that, you know, the economy and individuals, you know, can survive for extended periods of time. Probably was necessary, probably was when we did it. It most likely has helped, you know, mitigate, you know, the spread of the virus. And we certainly look forward to having the opportunity to socially gather, period. And then secondly, you know, get the right things in place so we can cruise with confidence.
Great. Nick, why don't you take us into our next question, or our next poll question? So you want to introduce it, Nick?
Yeah, sure. So this question relates to some of the concerns that you may have about cruising. So what would be your number one concern? Obviously, you might have multiple of these, but we really want to hear your number one concern. Potential bankruptcy or schedule changes, cleanliness of ships, changes to popular ports of call, reduction in onboard perks or services, or any health requirements or restrictions that may be imposed moving forward. So we got answers string in here pretty quickly. I'll keep this open for just another few seconds. Again, your number one concern about the future of cruising. All right, and here are those results. So it looks like just over a third are worried about health requirements and restrictions, Brian and Arnold. Fewer with others, but still across the board, all of these are clearly concerns with our viewers.
Which is not surprising to me. I think let's move into like what the future of the onboard experience could look like. I actually just flew for the first time last week on United Newark to LAX, and you know, wearing a mask on a plane was a little bit different. You know, the onboard food and service was definitely, you know, limited. There was no ice on board, for example, or, you know, hard alcohol. You know, on a 4 or 5 hour flight, that's not such a big deal. But on a 7-day cruise, if there are these big changes in service, it could fundamentally shift the future. Arnold, what are your thoughts on the onboard experience fundamentally changing? Is there anything we know now that you can share with us?
So first of all, I'll start at a very high level. our highest responsibility, and therefore our top priorities, are always compliance, environmental protection, and the health, safety, and well-being of our guests, of the people and the places we go, and of our crew. So those are always our top priorities. And so the first answer to the question is, we are going to comply with whatever the destinations we go to have mandated. It has to be the protocols for them to welcome our guests and for them to feel comfortable. That's number one. Number two, what could it look like? At this stage, it could look like a lot of different things. Some people talk about density on the ship. Well, obviously, if you're in the cabin, you are socially distanced already. So it's not the idea of how many people you have for cabins. It's much more the public spaces on the ships. Now, those of you who've cruised a lot, you know there's lots of space on the ship, and you can be on the ship with 6,000 guests, and at times be naturally socially distanced on the Lido deck or wherever you go. And there are also times when it's more congested and it's more crowded. And so those social venues are the places you have to look. So if you say there's going to be a social distancing required, which we're not sure there will be by the time we resume, but let's say there is. And let's say you're in the theater. Well, instead of maybe 2 shows in a night, you may have 4 shows, a little bit shorter. And so you're able to accommodate everybody in the shows with proper social distancing. Similarly, people say buffet lines. Well, most cruises now, the food is already shielded. Often you're served the food. So the issue is the queuing in the buffet. So you would have properly social distancing, for the queuing. Are you going to wear masks? Are you going to be allowed to cruise? Like, first of all, what if you have a pre-existing condition and you're elderly? Are you going to even be allowed on a cruise ship, because you're particularly vulnerable to COVID-19 and having a significant reaction to it if you were to contract it? Again, we think in many instances, medical experts and others will guide us in those things. You may have to have a certification from a physician saying that you are medically okay to cruise. We aren't trying to predetermine all those things. The other experiences on board, the crew, if we sail sooner, if we sail earlier, almost certainly the crew will be wearing masks or shields like you see in restaurants and stuff today, if that occurs sooner. If it occurs later, maybe they will, maybe they won't. It depends on the epidemiology of this virus and what's actually happening. For guests, will guests be required to wear masks and stuff? Again, we'll have to see how this evolves over time. Even on your flight, I'm sure a number of people were not wearing masks, because I've been in the airports and a lot of people are not wearing masks. So what's really required and what seems to be the best practice? So that's why I mentioned earlier that it's really important we let the medical experts and the science drive us to which protocols and which regimens are going to best mitigate the spread, because that's our focus. And we're not married to any particular solution. We're just looking for the best solutions that serve public health and give great confidence to guests, to crews, and us confidence knowing that we put our guests in the best possible situation.
There's a lot of, so I myself have the antibodies. What that means is still a little bit unclear.
Oh.
There's still a lot of unknowns about super spreaders and the virus itself. Are there any breakthroughs in science that you think would quicken the time, shorten the time to get back on a cruise ship? Are there any key moments where we need to really figure out, like, transmission? Are there any breakthroughs that you're particularly interested in finding out?
I'm interested everywhere, but especially testing. Obviously, if there were refinements in testing where you could have greater confidence that if you tested, you knew someone really was COVID-free, or not, that in the short term would be awesome. The next best things, of course, if we could get them right away, they would be perfect, would be therapies and vaccines, but those are down the road. But what I'm encouraged by is all these restarts around the world, they've occurred differently. Even some of the pauses were different. So there's lots of data. And the scientists are mulling through the data to look at it. There's lots of population data to look to say, okay, what happened when the restart occurred this way? What happened when the restart occurred that way? And to see where there were spikes and peaks and so on. so we can learn what really will be the best way forward to mitigate spread. And I think I'm very encouraged with the wealth of data that's available. And there are so many people working on it, and we're learning constantly. Every week there's new news. You can remember it was don't wear a mask, wear a mask, wear an N95 mask. Whoop, don't wear an N95 mask. So it keeps changing because the knowledge increases. People learn more. And so I'm very encouraged that we're at that point, that I believe in a number of weeks, there's going to be a lot more clarity. But if you're asking for one short-term breakthrough that's possible, that could really, give everybody more confidence, of course, super accurate testing regimen that made it clear whether someone had COVID or not. That was quick and easy. If that happened, that'd be a wonderful, short-term solution. I'm not predicting that will happen, but if it did, obviously, that quick and easy, super accurate testing. But again, we can't count on that happening. We have to deal with what we have, and we'll use the medical, experts and the science to determine it, and then we will be in compliance with whatever is dictated by others.
A lot of the airlines have completely revamped how they clean planes and the products, and a lot of hotels now have partnerships with Lysol and medical institutions, which are, something we didn't see coming into 2020. How is the cleanliness of cruise ship, how is that process changing? Has it changed, or do you feel confident in what you were doing before was sufficient?
Well, we feel confident about what we were doing before, but we need to understand the peculiarities of COVID-19 to see if we need to do some things differently. But as you know, we've been dealing with, viruses on the world for a long time, and cruise ships have been sailing the world. So we've had to deal with SARS and MERS and Zika, and we've had to deal with chickenpox and measles, and we had to deal with norovirus, which, isn't deadly, but definitely is more than a simple inconvenience. And in fact, the cruise industry has dealt with norovirus very, very well. People call it the cruise, disease only because we're the only ones that report it. But the actual incidence of norovirus on cruise ships is order of magnitudes below what it is on land. And a lot of that is because of the sanitation practices and the other practices on board that we have to mitigate the spread of norovirus. So from a sanitation standpoint, a lot of these other travel and tourism sectors are starting to catch up with where cruise has been. We've had hand sanitizer stations throughout, the ships for a long time. We've had deep cleaning practices because of norovirus and other things for a long time. We've had signs up about, washing your hands and so on and so forth on cruise ships for a very long time. That doesn't mean there aren't additional measures we could take or should take, and we will take those if the science and medical advice suggests we should, and we're definitely examining that. And COVID-19 is its own special virus, and if there are unique things we need to do in that regard, obviously we'll do them.
It's interesting, I flew and the plane was the cleanest I've ever seen it. I think more and more people, especially when we learn
cleaning with their wipes. When I got on, everybody had wipes, and they were all wiping down everything, overhead and everything themselves. But go ahead. Yeah.
That was actually the first time that I've ever wiped down myself. I've always been whatever. My immune system's strong. But I think so we've actually seen there's nearly 600,000 people being screened by the TSA. This is up from 80,000 at the bottom of the pandemic. So clearly Americans are getting back to the skies. And, when you think about it, versus a cruise ship where you're in your own cabin and can potentially distance, you could be sitting next to a person on a plane. But I think as people learn, wear a mask and, wash your hands, and, with the Hepa filters on airplanes, it's actually a pretty, overall safe environment. What is it? Do you have the same Hepa filters on cruise ships, like the air filters that constantly clean out the air, or?
Yeah, well, first of all, we have different systems on different ships and a lot of open air systems and what have you. But the reality is, again, and this is where I think the science is really important. And I'm just reporting what I've read so far. We actually have, expert advice, and we'll follow that. But there has not been indication of significant transmission through the air systems. And so, that doesn't appear to have been a significant contributor to the transmission of the virus. Having said that, of course, we're always focused, not just because of, COVID-19, the air quality on the ships, for the guests and so on. And so, yeah, a number of ships have those particular filters, others have different systems, et cetera. But, we're conscientious in a broader sense. But when you talk about COVID-19 per se, my understanding, the best knowledge that's been shown to me, and we're not sailing guests right now, so when we do, we'll have all the official stuff, is that it has not been a significant contributor to the transmission of the virus.
One of the things, I wrote a blog post about how cruising can, if you can create a safe ship and go to your own island where, a lot of the cruise lines own their own private islands, that you could create a kind of safe environment. Are you currently looking at more private island experiences, with potentially countries closing off to cruise ships? Is Carnival actively searching for more ports that you could create your own, controlled environment?
Well, we've been in the business of having private destinations and private islands for a while. So we have a combination of 6 in terms of private islands and private destinations in the Caribbean alone that we have, for our 9 world-leading cruise line brands. And so, we have every opportunity to take advantage of that, and we have for some time. Having said that, I think it's very important to remember the economic multiplier and the quality of life impact of cruise. And so it's important that our ships go to the other destinations, both from a guest experience standpoint. So guests really experience it. We go back to where we started in terms of different people, different places, different, that they've, experienced the authentic, local fare where they're going. And also that they get to experience the history and the culture in an authentic, way. So we think the combination is good. Having said that, of course, having your own space, you can control things a little bit better. But we're going to work with the destinations where we do go to ensure that, the controls are there that give the guests the confidence, while hopefully not overly making the experience less authentic. And so we think it's really important, though, that we reconnect to the places people want to go and help drive the economies, get people back to work, help have an economic multiplier that improves the quality of life. COVID-19 is serious, but there are lots of other health issues. And the best way to address a lot of those health issues are to make certain that, people have a decent quality of life and aren't living in poverty. And cruise creates, every job on a cruise ship creates 5 to 7 jobs in the rest of the economy. When a ship comes into port, there are scores of small owners and individual operators, as well as, more significant sized businesses that hire a lot of people that are positively impacted. And so we don't want to just focus on the private destinations, but of course, that'll be a key part of the itineraries.
Great. Let's, Nick, let's do the next question, or the next poll question.
Great. So for this one, we're looking at some of the kind of the business aspect of cruising. So obviously, we've got several questions coming in about new ships, a possible change in the types of ships that are going to be focused on. But which of the following would be most upsetting to you as a cruiser? New ships possibly being delayed from their scheduled launch dates, potentially a refocus on smaller vessels, your favorite cruise line potentially going out of business, filing for bankruptcy, or a lack of future deals. We're getting a lot of questions about the cost. So I would love to hear your thoughts on which of these things you are concerned about related to kind of the business side of cruising. And we got about 65% of folks have voted, and I will share all of these results in our follow-up recording post that will go live tomorrow, so you can see exactly how your fellow cruisers voted here. And I will share that now with the audience. So it looks like we do have a lot of concerns of cruise lines going out of business, also lack of future deals, less so on the delay of new ships and a refocus on smaller vessels, but still some folks looking at those as well, Brian and Arnold.
Interesting. Speaking of the cruise ships, In the aviation industry, we've seen airlines retire planes early, which for aviation geeks has been really sad to see these beautiful planes just parked. Are we going to see similar in the cruise industry? Maybe for the good, like with the retirement of the fantasy class vessels, which date back to the 90s. And also, will we see the nice new big ships like the Mardi Gras still on on pace to come? What's going on with the fleets right now?
Well, first of all, a lot of people love those fantasy class ships, Brian, and they love them, and they book well and they sail well, and we always keep them fresh. You don't want any ship out there that isn't aligned with guest expectations. So, you have to keep the ship fresh and in line with your guest expectations. But having said that, absolutely, there will be an acceleration of retirement of ships. There's no question about that. And I'd go so far as to say it's highly probable you're going to see some ships actually scrapped as opposed to just moving to secondary or tertiary markets. So there's no question that will occur. And concerning the new ships, of course, the yards experience stay-at-home, shelter-in-place, and we're not operating for a period of time, and slow startups, et cetera. This whole thing has upset the whole apple cart in terms of getting supplies in for ships and so on and so forth. So there will definitely be delays in the arrival of the new ships. And we had several coming this year, Enchanted Princess and our Princess line, Iona and our P&O line, of course the Mardi Gras, for our Carnival line with the roller coaster on top and all that good stuff. And so those ships are all going to be delayed. And if you want to know how long and when, should just check the websites for the individual brand that you have a preference for, and you'll see when they know they'll report. But a lot of that is still evolving. We're in constant dialogue with the yards and with the suppliers, because it's not just whether the yard is up and running, but the suppliers have to be up and running to provide the so many subcontractors involved. So there will be delays in the ships. And when it starts up again, it's every destination is not going to start at the same time. So, in the beginning, there will be, fewer ships by a lot starting out than there were when we shut down, because all the destinations won't be open. They're going to open up in their own time with their own rules and regulations. So it's going to take us some time to get back to, the level of cruising where we were before. And I think the important thing to remember for those in the industry, and especially the travel agent partners out there and everything, is that there's about 500 million people pre-COVID-19 that were taking vacations annually. About 30 million people last year took a cruise. So cruise is still a very small part of the total vacation business. And so even at our peak, and we were doing very well, we were growing nicely and all that, but we were still tiny. We still have very low penetration, ultimately, because we are capacity constrained. We don't, we couldn't sail more people because the cabins, we sail full, and I'm sure most of the other cruise lines do as well. So there'll be lots of demand when the time comes. We'll still have some work to do, obviously, after all the noise over COVID-19 with those who haven't cruised before. I saw on the note on the.
I think they said this might happen. Arnold should be right back. I think it just has to reset quickly. And 3, 2.
So Brian, while we're waiting to come back, we did have a question. Someone wanted to know what would make you comfortable to get on a cruise ship yourself?
Well, what would make me comfortable? I would cruise now. I would want to know what the cruise lines, like I was in Palm Springs, I was at a casino and restaurants, I wore my mask, I used my hand sanitizer, and, I would, probably wouldn't go to a packed, if people weren't wearing masks, I wouldn't go to like the packed casino. But in general, I feel, I also have the antibodies, so that helps a little bit, knowing that I had COVID and it was very, very minor. So I'm ready to sail, but I would want to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Yeah, let's do it.
We're ready for you.
So
sorry,
just
we
back
have
to your
difficulty.
Yeah, no, we thought that might happen. So yeah, if you just want to finish your point, if you remember what you were talking about.
Yeah, I think what we were talking about was what were we talking about? The Nick, help us out.
Well, actually, I'll just lead. I think it was going to. I want to ask. Our readers are very much into deals, and we've seen hotels offer future bonuses. Etihad Airlines is currently offering a crazy 50% bonus towards future credit. What do you got for us deals wise?
Okay, so what we were talking about, now that you said that, was we were just talking about the level of demand for cruise coming out and the fact we're going to have to spend some time getting those who haven't cruised to consider cruise, because they already hadn't cruised for a reason. And with all the negative noise that happened during COVID-19, those who haven't cruised, we're going to have to continue to chip away at these myths that they believe about cruising. To show that, and the best way to do that is people like you, Brian, who and those others who have cruised, sharing their experiences and helping people realize what a cruise experience really is. Concerning deals and whatnot, I would just say that I would not count on a lot of deals. I think right now the deals you're seeing in terms of future cruise credits for cruises that have been canceled, and as people encourage you to book again, those are some great deals a number of companies have out, including a number of our brands on the future cruise credits. But I wouldn't wait around for a deal, because when we start sailing again, more than likely, because there's going to be fewer ships out and a huge base of previous cruise goers and people pent up, ready and anxious to cruise, that there's going to be more demand than supply initially. And so I would encourage people to plan ahead, take advantage of any deals they see now, because it's unlikely there will be a lot of deals in the near term going. So that's an opinion, not a fact or a forecast. And I just think the facts stack up that way. And I would encourage people to plan and take advantage of whatever deals they can get now.
What's your take on 2021 cruise bookings? Are they coming in higher than what you thought, or?
I can't talk between quarters or a publicly traded company, blah, blah, blah. But what I can tell you is what we said before, which was, while of course, bookings are down, the reality is that because of, the pause and all that, the reality is we are getting bookings for 21, and it's at a great pace. And so that's what we said, previously. That's all I can say. And I think that, again, cruise looks strong for the long term. I saw a number of people were concerned that their line from the question I was able to see, I couldn't see all the questions on the screen, that their particular line that they favor, they were concerned it could go out of business or something. And I can only speak for ourselves, and I can reference what's been publicly said about the others. But we're working hard. We went out, we got financing. It's true we have no revenues. It's tough when you have 100 ships and hundreds of millions of dollars a month in expenditures you have to, in servicing debt and the people you do have to, and you have no revenue coming in to sustain that. But we went out and got additional financing to ensure that we had a runway that we could weather if there was no revenue for an extended period of time. As we've publicly stated, that runway takes us into November and potentially beyond that, and we're working hard to lengthen that. The other cruise lines have commented, other cruise companies have commented that they have runways that long or longer. And so I think the industry for the large players is pretty well positioned to weather the storm. But, we're anxious to get back to cruising, and we're anxious to get people back on our ships when it's the right time and when we can do it confidently from a public health standpoint.
Great. I'm going to end with one final question, then Nick's going to take some of the best. We've had hundreds of questions. So thank you to everyone who has submitted a question. It's about future cruising. So I'm excited to take a Cunard cruise, the Queen Mary from New York to the UK. Arnold, what's the first cruise, leisure cruise? You've been stressed out this year. Where are you going to go on a leisure cruise when this is all said and done?
Well, that's a trick question. Depends what time when it happens. And so right now I'm like you probably. I'm 24/7. I started 5 a.m. this morning with a call in Australia, followed by a call with Saudi Arabia, follow. And then you keep going. And before you know it, it's 10, 11 o'clock at night. And then you start the cycle all over again. So there are a lot of places that have invited me because I'm in lots of dialogue with heads of states and around the world and obviously throughout the Caribbean with in Europe and everywhere else. So I've had many invitations. So we'll see. But actually, I will share this. One of my favorite cruises ever is Antarctica. And so I did a seaborne cruise to Antarctica. If you've ever caught the Great Migration on the plains of Africa, that feeling you get, everybody gets that same feeling, no matter what ethnicity. It's the thing we have in common. Gender, ethnicity, age, it doesn't matter. You get this human spirit feeling, this elevated human spirit feeling, watching that Great Migration. And the same thing happens in Antarctica. If you talk to anyone that's been to Antarctica and caught in the sea migration and seen all the activity there, it's that same unbelievable human spirit feeling. And it's one of the greatest cruises ever. But there's so many great places to go. So I may just be going down to the Caribbean or taking a cruise up through New England to Canada or, going over to the Mediterranean or the Baltic or, there's so many great places to go.
Indeed, there are. I was booked on an Antarctic cruise years ago and I had to cancel. So that now just increased.
You got to do it. You have to do it. Yeah.
All right, Nick, do you want to open it up for the submitted questions?
Yep, sure. So thank you to everyone who submitted questions. I'm going to try to bucket them under common threads that we're seeing. So one of the big things we're seeing, Arnold, are questions about reduced capacity on board to comply with potential social distancing policies. What are some conversations or some things that you're looking at along those lines?
Well, thank you for the question. I think I mentioned it earlier. The reality is that when you're in your cabin, you're naturally socially distanced. So the issue becomes the social venues on the ship and what are you doing there? And as I talked it through, if you're in a buffet line where the food is shielded and you're being served, so you're protected that way, the exposure comes in the queuing. And so if there's requirements for social distancing when we resume cruising, you can do the social distancing in the queue. Similarly in the theater, if there's social distancing required in the theater, you can accommodate that by shortening the shows and having 4 shows in the evening instead of just 2. And dining, you have in-room dining, you have main dining, you have specialty dining on most ships. And again, you can navigate through that to effect distancing and dining if it comes to that. But the question will be what social distancing is required. Restaurants in Texas start out at 25%. I think they moved to 75% this week or last week. Soon they may be at 100% occupancy. So by the time we resume, there may be enough knowledge and enough risk tolerance associated given the level of COVID in terms of community spread that there might be sufficient tolerance that there may be limited social distancing required. So we'll have to see. But we'll do whatever we need to do. We'll make it as comfortable for the guests as we can. And we certainly won't cruise if the experience in the end isn't going to be a positive experience for the guests.
Great information. Speaking of resuming cruises, a lot of questions of, I have a cruise booked on X date. Is it going to go? What are the chances it's going to go? I know you mentioned before that there's a lot of uncertainty, but can you take our viewers through some of the conversations that you're having with the relevant authorities around what that timeline looks like and how you're staying as up to date as you can on moving forward with a plan for resuming sailing?
Well, again, there's so many authorities around the world, and so we're in dialogue with many. If you're looking at cruises originating in Europe, Germany, Italy, Spain are actively looking at the possibility of resuming cruise soon. Obviously, we're talking here in the U.S. There's a host of Caribbean nations that are anxious to get cruise going again. So those are all live dialogues. It's impossible to predict specifically when you would start. But those dialogues are, I would say, the most intense ones are in Europe right now. But here in the U.S., we're all focused on first and foremost doing the right thing from a public health perspective. And then secondly, making sure we can do that in a way where the guest experience is truly enjoyable. And that's what we're working on. So there's no specific date. I think all you can do is do what you've been doing, is check with, if you have a cruise book, check with the company that you've booked with and make certain that they're communicating. I know we're trying to do that proactively with all of our brands to keep everybody up to date. And we're not anxious to cancel far out, because this thing is evolving and changing so rapidly that, you don't know, you could easily experience the cruise. I think you may see additional cancellations where, even though a company may think they're going to cruise in that period, they have already determined particular itinerary is unlikely, and they'll have to modify the itinerary substantially. So you may begin to see some cancellations further out and with that kind of a dynamic. But just check with the company, and it's a tough time for everyone. But we, like you, want to get back to cruising soon. But when it's in the best interest of public health, it serves public health, and in a way that our guests can have a great experience.
Great. Now, obviously, this, as Brian mentioned before, this was just an unprecedented downturn. Lots of cancellations, changes, things like that. I know timelines for getting refunds. Some airlines, it took me weeks or even months to get my money back or my voucher back. We are hearing from some who have experienced kind of an extended timeline. So what would you say to those folks that are still waiting for a potential refund or a future voucher, and the steps that you all are taking to address those concerns?
First of all, if it's involving any of our lines, whether it's AIDA, Costa, Cunard, P&O, Princess, Carnival, Holland America, Seabourn, in any one of our lines, P&O Australia, first of all, apologies if, and I mean that sincerely, if you've experienced an extended refund timeline. So that's the first thing. The reality is, of course, nobody was prepared for this. With the level of cancellations and the total pause of cruise, it's a huge amount of volume that we've never seen before. And systems weren't set up to handle it. There were a lot of things had to be put in place. And we methodically went after it. And hopefully, in most cases, I know in a number of cases we are caught up. And in other cases, we're catching up. The reason why we can't push one button is the brands are on different systems. They have different booking systems. They have different travel professional relationships. There's a lot of different things going on. But the reality is we are committed to getting people who want refunds their money back. And we're committed to ensuring that the people who choose future cruise credits are clear that they have it and that we can facilitate them rebooking. But apologies to anyone that felt is way overdue. And I can only tell you, and it's not an excuse, it's just a true explanation. The volume was unprecedented. The systems weren't equipped to handle it. And it's taken us time to manage through. But even with that, in many cases, it hasn't been super longer than what it was before COVID-19 in many cases. But I know in some cases it was.
Great. I appreciate that. And we're getting close to the top of the hour here. So one final question related to your ports of call. Definitely some possible changes, but the concerns around not just destinations or ports of call being closed to cruise ships, but the risks of getting off and having shore excursions and interacting with the community. And if someone does get sick and you're in a foreign port of call. So what are some of the conversations you're having with the relevant authorities in some of these locations around the health issue of having a large influx of cruisers coming into some of these ports of call and the potential risks that go along with that?
I can tell you now that one thing that we're working to make certain does not happen is what happened as this thing evolved, which was concern that someone might have contracted COVID on the ship, and therefore no one being allowed to off the ship into the port or destination and so on. That is not a method for effective travel or a great experience. And so any destination we go to, we would pre-work that out. If there is, because if COVID is in the community, if it's out there in society, chances are no matter what protocols you put in place, eventually there's a risk that you can have someone on board that contracts COVID or has symptoms that causes you to consider that they may have COVID, depending what the testing protocols are at the time and what's available to us. So that could happen. And in that case, we want to have the protocols already set up with any destination of exactly how that's going to be handled. Beyond that, as people just get off shifts and get back on, again, we will have to have protocols for the excursions and so on. But of course, people want to experience this and travel. They like to do their own thing sometimes. And we're not going to, overly police people because, that's not the right experience and we're not equipped to do that. But we will make certain in the destinations we go that, again, the appropriate, precautions have been taken. As with shoreside, everywhere in the world, whatever's happening at the time, in terms of what seems to be the best way to mitigate, spread of the virus.
All right. Well, that's wonderful. And we are at the end of our time. So, Brian, I'll turn it back to you to wrap up with our special guest, Arnold Donald, CEO of Carnival Corporation.
Thank you, Nick.
Arnold, thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time. I know you are a busy man, but I just want to say on behalf of the travel industry, and the millions of people that it employs around the world, thank you for helping lead through the most difficult time the industry has ever seen. And I'm confident that, you guys are taking the utmost, public health is your number one priority. If there was one theme today that came across to me is that, the experience in cruising is important, but nothing is more important than public health. And just want to thank you for putting that first and foremost. And I look forward to toasting you on the high seas when it's safe to do so.
Looking forward to seeing you on Cunard. We want to get you on that cross-Atlantic sailing that you're anxious to take. Thank you so much, Brian. Thank all that are listening. And just know we have an incredibly gifted team of people who I happen to be representing here in this moment, who are working very hard to do just what you said, to reintroduce cruise, with the clear focus on our priorities, which are compliance, environmental protection, and the health, safety, and well-being of our guests, of our all the people in the places we go, and our crew. And I can't thank you enough for what you do to promote travel and tourism and to promote cruise. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And one final note, I see a couple questions on environmentalism. Arnold and I actually did a podcast on my talking points where we talked a lot about environmental measures and what Carnival's doing. So I highly recommend, if you haven't listened to that episode, check it out, Talking Points, wherever you get your podcasts. With that, I'll leave it over to Nick. Nick, thanks for helping moderate my first talk.
Yes, of course. So as you leave today, a few action items. First of all, we'd love for you to give us our feedback. Give us your feedback with a post-session survey that will launch automatically. Also, we do have a great TPG talk scheduled for this Thursday, a special date and time, 3 p.m. Eastern time with Summer Hall on the reopening of Disney. You can register for that at thepointsguy.com/nextTPGtalks. We'd also love for you to join us in the TPG Lounge on Facebook, as well as our weekly and our daily newsletter. You can follow Brian on Instagram at Brian Kelly, and of course, follow all of our social media channels as well. Thank you all so much for attending. Apologies, we couldn't get to all of the great questions coming in, but please visit thepointsguy.com to follow up with any further questions, and stay tuned for announcements on exciting future of travel sessions with Brian Kelly. Have a great day, everyone.
Nick, you still with us?